Okay, so our next video, we're going to carry on looking at the brain. We're going to look in a little bit more detail at those three main parts, the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain, and look at the functions of them. So, remember from the last one, we can split it into these three parts, the forebrain being that biggest part, the orange, the midbrain being that central part, the green, and the hindbrain being the pink there. We'll look at the hindbrain first of all. You'll see it's called the hindbrain because it's kind of at the back, and it links to your spinal cord. Okay, the place where it links is called the medulla. Attached to that is the cerebrum, or cerebellum. Okay, this is the oldest part of your brain. And when we talk about the oldest part of your brain, what we are talking about is evolutionary speaking. So what we're saying is our ancestors, over millions of years, this is the part they developed first. Okay, it's the most basic part of the brain. So it's controlling the most basic, simple structures. Okay, so you've got and you do need to have an idea how to spell these guys. It's not going to be an oral test, but you do need to have an idea how to spell these words. The medulla oblongata, that does things like controlling your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing. Okay? Therefore, it's linked to the part of your nervous system which is controlling those automatic responses. If you can't remember what part that is, make sure you check back in your notes and you can add that in. When we talk about the most basic, that's what we're talking about. Yeah? The kind of stuff that you're not really controlling. The pons, just above the medulla, that's the bit that kind of links your hindbrain with the midbrain and the forebrain. Okay, so it's kind of connecting the two, making them all work together. Also has a role in your facial expressions. So it's a little bit more conscious than your medulla. And then you've got the cerebellum. Bottom rear of your brain, and it kind of looks like a mini brain. So if we look back at it, you see how it's kind of like a little mini brain off to the side. That's what helps you coordinate your balance and your fine muscle movements. So right now, if you're writing, you're using fine muscle movements to make those tiny little movements, as opposed to larger, gross muscle movements that make you like stand up or walk. Then we move into the midbrain. Remember, that's very deep inside your brain. Okay? That's connected to your senses, particularly connected directly to your eye and to your ears, but we're also getting, traveling up that spinal cord, impulse from your touch, your pain, and your temperature receptors. Okay? Its main functions, number one, to help coordinate that sensory information. So it's getting all that information in from all five senses, and it's thinking about how we then coordinate simple movements in response to that. Yep, so if someone picks up a ball, throws it at your head, you're going to use your vision. You're going to use that to then move your eyes, move your neck, to look at it, to notice it. Okay? Hopefully you're also going to lift your hand and catch it, but that's involving a more complex movement that we'll come to later. There's a structure in the midbrain which is called the reticular formation. That bit in green highlight there. Okay? That controls arousal. Now when we're saying arousal, we're not saying arousal. We're saying waking up. Yeah? When you actually rouse from your sleep. Okay? So, if you were fast asleep, dead to the world, and I got a metal rod and stimulated your reticular formation, and remember that you've got no pain receptors in your brain, so I'm not being that mean to you, but if I stimulated it, then you would straight away wake up and you're not going to feel tired at all. So you're not going to have that general waking up of, oh, I don't feel like getting out of bed that you teenagers are so good at. It'd be like, bang, I'm awake. If, on the other hand, I was a bit mean to you and I cut out your reticular formation, you're going to go into a coma, a deep sleep, and you're never going to wake up. Yeah, it's that harsh because you're not able to rouse at all. Now, think about this. Do you sometimes find it difficult to fall asleep? Okay? Do you get sent to bed by your parents saying go to bed about, I don't know, 10 o'clock? And you lie there in bed waiting for sleep to happen, but you get bored, so you're sitting there on your phone, or on your device, or watching the TV. Problem is, what you're doing in there is you are stimulating a gland inside your midbrain, the pineal gland. So it's an endocrine gland. So it produces a hormone, which is called melatonin. Melatonin is really important for the onset of sleep. So if you're watching a screen, particularly a lit screen with blue light, then what's happening is you're stopping that pineal gland making the melatonin. And if you stop the melatonin, then you're not going to get sleepy. Okay? It's actually better to read a book, much better to read a book, because that's not stimulating it in the same way. That's why it's much more common that someone would fall asleep reading a book than someone would fall asleep watching a device. And if this is you, you definitely need to turn off that device. The last part of our brain, the forebrain. And again, we've got a few important parts within there. The cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. Okay? The forebrain, called fore because it means last brain. So that's the most recently developed portion of the brain. Okay? So when the humans became more and more intellectually advanced, we're using their hands, we're using tools more, we're really importantly doing things like cooking food and therefore getting more nutrients out of it. Okay? We're becoming more intellectually advanced. Our forebrain is the part that was really growing. Most important parts we're going to look at, the thalamus. Now, this is the switchboard of our brain. Okay? So the sensory information goes into the thalamus first, and the thalamus sends the information to the right part of the brain. So you remember we said that the other part of the brain was focusing on simple movements in response to stimulation from your senses, and that we'd need a more complex response in order to raise your hand and catch the ball? Well, the thalamus is what's involved in that. The hypothalamus, tiny little part, size of a pea. It controls things like thirst, hunger, body temperature. So it links with the endocrine system a bit there. Now we're getting to the sexual arousal, okay, and the endocrine system overall. So it's that main link between your nervous and your endocrine system. And then the biggest part, 90% of your brain mass, is your cerebrum. And that's your higher intellectual functions. That's what allows you to speak, to have abstract thoughts, to write, to solve problems, to use tools. Okay? There are 4 lobes to your cerebrum. They've all got a slightly different function. It's significant that humans have very large cerebrum because that actually is what allows us to basically develop and take over the world. Yeah? If we didn't have such a large brain, we wouldn't have been able to build the tools that we need. We wouldn't have been able to problem solve, so therefore be able to cope with extremes of temperature and extremes of climate. To hunt lots of different types of food rather than being limited to one sort of prey. Okay? And remember, our unit that we're looking at here is how humans took over the world. So this brain is what we needed. The lobes of the forebrain. The frontal lobe, blue one, reasoning, planning, bit of speech, movement, emotions, problem solving, lots of things. Yellow one, temporal lobe, that's your perception. Recognizing auditory stimuli, memory and speech. So hearing something and being able to respond to it and having your memory. Your parietal lobe, that's movement, orientation. So knowing where you are in relation to other things. Recognition, so being able to see someone and go, yeah, I've seen you before. Recognize your friends, your family. And then your occipital lobe is associated with visual processing. So yes, we take in information from the outside world through our eyes, but how do we actually process that information? You split into two halves called the hemispheres. Those hemispheres work together, so they're connected to one another. The right hemisphere, they say, is more active if you're artistic, you're creative. The left, they say, is more active if you are analytical and logical. But that's nowhere near like 100%, everyone agrees with that. For you to process the information that is all sent to your brain, you need those two hemispheres to connect and to talk to each other. Okay, this guy in the middle, your corpus callosum, that is the connection. Thick band of nerve fibers, literally, but also figuratively connects the two. All right. In the next lesson, we're gonna build a model and have a look through at these different parts of the brain.